Welcome to our webinar on Tobin SleepWell cybersecurity services. This is a new webinar we've put out to talk about some of the solutions we have that we think will make your systems more secure, let you understand about some of the technologies that are out there to have your systems be more secure so that you are empowered to choose or not and decide what you want to do about cybersecurity. So that's me. For those of you that have never met me, welcome again. And we have a few parts to today. We're going to talk a little bit about the threat landscape, understanding a little bit what your risk is out there. We're going to talk about security audits and assessments, security alerting services, a little bit why they might be valuable to you, and next steps for those of you that may be interested in taking next steps. Now, this is not the same thing as our overall cybersecurity webinar, so if you haven't seen that, you can sign up next time we do that, and we also do have that recorded. That's a much larger overview of cybersecurity. We're going to talk today about some ways security matters to businesses like yours, go into that so people get a sense of what's happening, and then talk about some of the ways that we go about dealing with this to try and minimize your risk and have you be able to recover successfully if there's a problem. I don't know how many of you ever watched the Hunger Games movies, with the future and the dystopian future and all the young people out there, kill or be killed kind of situation, and the little tagline is "May the odds be ever in your favor." And while we obviously hope none of this happens to anybody, for us right now, it's really not a matter of if, but when. I would say the odds are not in your favor that you will never have some cybersecurity incident. Small companies are a big target. More than half of business under $10 million have had one or more breaches, or 50% of those have been compromised more than once. The cost keeps going up of dealing with the attack, and sometimes those are hard dollars in the sense of paying someone, an IT provider, to help you recover when there's an attack. Sometimes it's lost revenue for the business. Sometimes it's lost reputation, things like that. So the cost is going up, and we're seeing more and more of that. We've had worked with a number of companies recently that have been breached, and depending on the nature of the breach we're dealing with, in some cases there was one that was recent and they were all prepared, so we just had to go through the recovery process. That was about $5,000. Another one was not prepared, and we had to help them pay ransom and help them recover and do our best to get all that going, and that bill was in the $30,000+ range. So these are real numbers we're talking about. This isn't just anecdotal. This is really happening. So another thing, that fourth bullet point, 33% of firms required at least 3 days to recover from an attack. So how well prepared you are is going to determine how quickly you get back in business. And in some cases, for those that have been hacked or where they haven't been able to recover, they go out of business within 6 months. So for a lot of you, you may be thinking about security, and if you do anything around IT or you hear the buzzwords out there, hopefully most of you have a good firewall, you're running good antivirus, you're doing the patching out there, making sure your systems are up to date. Maybe you're doing spam filtering to prevent some of the attacks coming through that way, and that's great, but those are really just the standard basics now. Back in the day, for people that didn't have these things and you had them, you were on the cutting edge, but now this is just table stakes. This is just the basics to get in the door. And those are really more about covering the external threats rather than dealing with the internal threats, and we'll talk about the differences between the external and the internal. So most people think about the external threats. They think about the hackers coming in, the people pounding on your firewall trying to breach your defenses, that kind of thing. But really, you're going to find as we talk that a lot of these are really coming from the internal side of things. Okay? A third of all security breaches from lost or stolen devices that took too long to rediscover. Others were caused by inadvertent misuse of data by employees. which may have never been discovered until after the fact. Sometimes they're malicious. There are breaches internally where you have an employee at risk, and on their way out, they decide to do something, steal data, expose data, crash the systems, wipe the systems. All in all, when you add all these up and you work the numbers, about 70% of all data breaches are from internal vulnerabilities. You know, I didn't mention one thing. If you have questions, I have you all muted right now. And if you have questions, feel free to use the chat box in the GoToMeeting toolbar and I'll ask your question, and I'll do my best to answer it right then or include it as we come along. But feel free to ask questions as we go. So we talk about the human element. Okay, there are technology errors out there. There are the computer glitches. There are the things like that. But really what causes security breach, and at least half and a little more than half, is human error. So it is the human factor that is where really a lot of the exposure is. And sometimes I joke, you know, computers would be really safe if it weren't for the humans, because often it is the human that's doing something either intentionally or unintentionally that causes that breach. Here's some of the reasons. End users are not following your policy and procedures, assuming you have policy and procedures. General carelessness, you know, they just are not considering what they're doing. We just put that in the world of careless. They're not getting up to speed on the new threats, where they thought they were doing something that was safe that's now proven to be unsafe. Nobody knows about it. There isn't education on that. There's simple lack of expertise on how to use some of the systems. And then finally, it's IT staff's failure to follow policies and procedures. And, you know, IT staff, you know, for some of you this may be a surprise, but we are human too, and we're not perfect. And there are steps and processes to put in place to try and reduce that human error. But all it takes is one weak moment, one missed checklist, and there's a possibility of an issue. So the question you can start to ask yourself as we go through this is, what are you actually doing to protect your business? How do you even go about starting to do that? You know, what is there? How do you make that happen? And so there is a best practice out there. There's the NIST cybersecurity framework. NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Testing. That is a government organization, and they have put together a really nice, simple 5-step method for best practice in protecting yourself and dealing with cybersecurity issues. First, identify what's going on. Understand your environment. What assets do you have? What's your business environment? The governance of things, risk assessment, risk management strategy. You know, what is that for you and your business? And every business, every industry is different. Until you really understand what's at risk and what there is to protect, it's hard to actually put together a plan around that. So the first step is that identification. After that, then you want to start looking at what it's going to take to protect what you've got. Access controls, training, security, around data specifically, protecting your information, the maintenance, the protective technologies. That's where we get into some of those things like the firewalls and that, but we'll talk later. There's more. And then once you've got everything protected, what are you doing to detect what might be happening? What are the anomalies that are happening? Who's watching the henhouse? What are you putting in place to actually understand if you've been breached, if someone's trying to breach you? And then after that, like I said, it's not a matter of if, it's a question of when. Then how do you respond to it? What do you deal with when you detect something or you're unsure if something seems strange? How do we respond to it? How do we communicate that? How do we deal with it? How do we fix it? And then how do we close that open door afterwards, so that whatever that was that got breached or has an issue, we now start protecting that. And then finally, there's the recovery. That is, if you've gotten the breach and something's gone on, or you've lost data, data's been part of a ransomware type situation, you had a major system crash, anything like that that we consider a security incident, how are we actually going to recover? A lot of people have some of the things in the recovery. They've got the backups, they've got those kinds of things, but they're not doing the other stuff to prevent from trying to prevent from actually having it occur in the first place. You know, it's great that we can recover, but if you're down for 4 days and in the end you recover, that's great, but being down for 4 days for some businesses is tremendously expensive. Causes bad reputation, causes lost work, rework, all of that type of thing. So one of the things we start talking about is this security assessment. That's usually the first place to start. And depending on your organization and what you need, there's really sort of 3 different levels of security assessments, and we just give them a clever name of silver, gold, and platinum. The silver assessment is just this broad-based evaluation of your security. We use some automated tools to gather information about your systems. It goes out, looks at your network, looks at your assets, gathers this information, and then we can report on it. And it's going to find some of the most common vulnerabilities in there, and that's great, right? For some of you, if you've never had this done, you don't know what you don't know. You've got kind of blind spots around this. And so once someone points out, hey, here's the low-hanging fruit, now at least you're empowered to actually do something about it, right? So we have these different steps we go through. We're evaluating the firewall, external vulnerabilities. We're looking at what can go in and out of your firewall. We look at how your patching is happening, your antivirus. We also look at more from an administrative perspective, how your data is set up, and also the physical security. And we go through and we assess all that, whether it's us or someone else, but you want that all assessed. You look at those deliverables. We're going to come back with reports. We're going to come back with plans. And then from there, now you can decide what to do. One of Tobin Solutions' commitments is to provide education, options, and recommendations. So this fits perfectly with this. You know, if you choose, once you see that you've got an issue, not to do something about it, you know, that's fine. That's your choice. However, our commitment is that you are at a moment of choice. You actually understand what it is, you're aware of it, and now you can choose what's right for your business. Maybe it's something you're never going to do, maybe it's something for budgeting reasons you can't do for 6 months, whatever that is, but as long as you're a clear choice. So these are some of the things we look at, and these are some of the things we find and that we continue to find with new clients. One is that they just don't have an adequate perimeter defense. That's outside your network. We call that the perimeter. Maybe they're not patching everything that they should be patching. Maybe they haven't got up-to-date antivirus everywhere, or no one's monitoring the antivirus to know what happens if someone in your company gets a virus. Are they actually telling you so that you can go do something about it? Access to that sensitive information. Maybe there's some people that are running as administrators that shouldn't be running as administrators. We see that a lot, where a regular user, maybe it's the office manager, the business manager, the CFO, their account that they use for day-to-day work is also set up as an administrator. That's not a good best practice, because your day-to-day work shouldn't be running as an administrator. While it may be a bit of an inconvenience, we understand that you have to log in somewhere else to do system administration. If you're the one that gets that email that compromises the system, you now have administrative rights on the network, and anything that malicious email was going to do can now do it as you. Same thing with physical security. How are people handling their data? If they're taking off-site backups, how are they doing that? Maybe they've got their server sitting out in their reception area. We've been in business now for, we're starting our 23rd year. We have seen a lot of things that we consider best practices, and we have a lot of things we consider not best practices. I should add it to this slideshow, we actually have a picture of somebody whose server room was in their bathroom. They had a bathroom, and for whatever reason, that's where they put their server room. And literally, right next to the server is a toilet and sink. Something floods there, it's not a good situation, right? So those are things we discover in the silver level. We also have the gold level assessment. So that's everything in the silver, but then we start to look at how people are logging in to the system and internal vulnerability scanning. So we start to look at, we use some additional tools and technologies to really scan the network in a way that it hasn't been scanned before, looking for the holes that the hackers look for. That if you do get a virus on the inside of your network, what those things are looking for. We call those vulnerabilities. So we actually scan for that and get a report. We also look for anomalous login detection. So that would be things like IDs that are logging in at weird times of the day and night that may or may not be appropriate, or may be appropriate, but let's look, let's understand it and then decide whether it makes sense or not. Also, do you have old accounts that haven't been logged in for a long time? What's going on with those? Do you still need those? If they haven't been logged in 3 months, maybe we should delete that account so it's no longer a potential security hole. We also start to look at your security policies. What have you got set up in your group policy, local policies, any business policies you have? If you don't have a written security policy, people are going to make up their own mind about what that looks like. They're going to do what they think is okay, and it may or may not actually match what your business needs. We have some sample security policies, like a template you can use to, and then with conversation, craft it to make it your own, so you don't have to start from scratch and completely reinvent the wheel. But again, unless you've told people this is our security policy and this is how we expect you to operate, they're just going to do the best they can. And sometimes the best they can doesn't work. Also, layer 2, layer 3, we get a little bit geeky here and all that, but we're looking more about just how the overall system is going, how some of these network pieces are configured. Maybe there's some things you didn't even know you've had. We've gone into clients and we said, what's this printer over here? And they said, we don't have a printer over there. And we ran the report and we said, no, we see this printer on the network. And then we found it, and it turns out that somebody, one of their employees, went to Best Buy, bought a printer for $99, plugged into the network so that they could print and make it easier for themselves and have to get up and walk the 20 feet to the printer. Didn't tell anybody about it. And they didn't know this printer existed. And that can be a risk. If you don't know what you have, that can be a risk. Is someone updating the printer? Is someone managing that printer, making sure it's secure? Because there are security holes in printers. So part of that review is what happens in the gold level assessment. And these are one-time assessments we do to understand where you're at, right? Get those initial things down. So in addition to discovering all those other things, we're also looking at the things in red here. It's a deeper level of vulnerabilities that are checked. And again, you may choose to be okay with what we find. You may not, but we want to make sure at least you know. Our commitment is no blind spots. Then we go to the platinum level. Takes on what's on the gold, which obviously includes the silver, and now we start to do more compliance audits. It depends on what your business needs are. If you are a healthcare provider or you work with healthcare providers and you have anything that would fall under HIPAA compliance, there's rules around that. There's auditing around HIPAA. If you take credit cards, there's PCI compliance. If you accept credit cards, use credit cards, you're required to go through a PCI audit to determine your level of exposure. So those are things that happen in the higher level assessments if you need them. And we have that available as well. Again, to get out of the world of blind spots into the world of the light, get things transparent so you understand what you've got. It's going to figure out what those major weaknesses are, what your compliance needs are. Once we've gotten all that, now we can move into the protect stage of things, right? Once we understand what you've got, then we can start to look at, okay, now if we know we've got some access issue, like you've got some people that are running as administrators that shouldn't be running as administrators, okay, now we know that. Now we can start taking actions to protect. We can move over to the right on the NIST cybersecurity framework. So after we run the security assessment, we will get you reports, and we will sit down with you to make it very clear so you understand what the reports mean. Our commitment is also plain language. Pull away the geek speak and make sure it's very clear you understand what we're talking about in on language you can understand. Not because anybody doesn't necessarily understand it, it's just not what you do every day. This is what we do every day, and we want to make sure we're very communicating very well along what's in this plan documents. And then from those documents, we're going to show you what we found. We're going to show you priorities. We're going to show you things that are high risk, medium risk, low risk, and then we can walk through on what a plan would look like to actually remediate those issues. Or you take the plan somewhere else. You know, it's up to you. If you got internally you want to handle it, if you're savvy enough, there may be some things you can do. If you work with someone else and you want just them to have the report and they'll take care of it, not an issue. We're happy to work with however you guys are around that. But the key is, again, getting that information and getting that first plan together. So when you think about it, first we start with the assessments. We identify what you've got. Now we go through the risk management plan to protect what you've got and put those things in place. And if you're doing that, you're already on the road to winning the game around this. Something else we offer, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I wanted to include this because this is something that we're adding in. You know, if you recall from one of the earlier slides, the failure to understand what the threat landscape is, the failure to understand what the new threats are, is part of your risk. So we have come up with a new solution for that. We call it Tobin SleepWell Aware. And if you might hear that SleepWell around, that's something we've branded. Those are all our security offerings, all under one umbrella of SleepWell. And SleepWell Aware is security awareness training. That is, we test your people. We risk profile them, and we do some initial testing to see what bad emails they're clicking on. We actually send them some fake emails that look like they're coming from banks and Amazon and Facebook and things like that. And then we determine who clicked on those bad emails and try to take some action. We get a report together. Then you can understand where you're at. If you have half your team or more is clicking on those bad emails, that's some risk. Now you know about it. After we get that, we have online video training. We can set up a real basic training solution for them. You can track who went to training, who didn't go to training. Understand that. And the managers can understand who's doing the training and who's not. Then after that, there's ongoing security awareness. We have a newsletter. There's a scam of the week email. We've got posters for around your office, for the break rooms, things like that to just keep people aware of what's happening with in the world of cybersecurity so they can remain vigilant. And then after that, we have ongoing campaigns for phishing, which are those emails you get that are trying to have you enter your ID and password. We have smishing. If you guys don't know what that is, the SMS and smishing. SMS is another name for texting on your phone. If any of you have been getting those text messages on your phone requesting information that are scams, you know, so is your team. So are people that work for you. And some of those smishing might be saying, hey, I'm from your IT company, give me your password. And all it takes is 1 weak moment. Oh, I guess they need my password. Oh, yeah, I heard they were doing some work. And then phishing are the voicemails. I think we've all been getting those voicemails now. So we can do these ongoing campaigns where we send these out a couple times a month or whatever schedule we decide on, and then provide continuing education. And the goal would be that what we discover in the risk profiling, if let's say it starts at 50%, the goal would be at over time to get that down to single digits or even zero, that no one's clicking on these testing campaigns. So I'm going to put that in there, make sure, because there is no set it and forget it with this stuff. Security is changing on a daily, weekly basis, and if you guys aren't up to speed on it, you're always going to be one step behind the hackers and the potential breaches. So when we talk about those ongoing services, that's one of those ongoing services is the SleepWell Aware for training. Gotta move that slide around to after this. As we get back to the cybersecurity framework, what's the next box? Detect. So once you've identified all your risk, and now you've put in all the protections around that, and you start training people, how do we know when something happens? How do we know when there's a new possible security event? And that's through a detection solution or managed detection and response. So we have a new product. We call it Tobin SleepWell Detective. And there's a couple of key components to it. There's what we call the alerting appliance, and that's a software or hardware appliance that sits inside your network, and it goes out and it does the scanning of the system. And when it finds something that's technical in nature, maybe it discovers that there's a patch that needs to be applied or some other kind of very technical, geeky issue, that email can go to us automatically and we can triage it. You know, we can look at it and say, is this a real alert? Is this like, I'm not a real alert, is it a real threat or is it a false positive? Because sometimes it's normal to get some issue. You know, maybe if you put a brand new computer on the network and it hasn't been fully patched yet, we may know that. You know, that may not be a security issue. We've already said, okay, you know, we're going to allow 24 hours for this to patch. And so that might be a false positive. Or maybe someone did install a new printer on the network and that was expected. We just didn't know about it. So we got an alert, new printer installed. We look at it. We contact you. Yep, we told them to get a new printer. It's okay. But when we get those requests that come through, we're trying to remediate, investigate, or ignore. And we have this cloud portal that you get to use that'll track all of those. So every time something comes in, are we going to fix it? Are we going to look into it more? Or are we just going to ignore it? And you get the same thing. So there are some alerts that are going to come your way, and you get the choice of whether you want to remediate, investigate, or ignore. So one of the alerts you might get would be maybe it might detect an anomalous login. Maybe one of your people who never logs in on the weekend has suddenly logged in on the weekend. And you'll get an email alert with that. Now that may be perfectly fine. They might be, yep, they were working on a big project. They said they were going to work this weekend. It was all approved. Or it might be, no, they really shouldn't have been working this weekend. That's very unusual. Let's investigate. So you'll get those emails because that is more likely to have happened on your side of things. And then you can decide, yep, okay, it's a very clear message. It's a very simple thing. It'll say this user logged in at this time. That's anomalous behavior. What would you like us to do? And at the bottom of the email, there'll be buttons. It'll either say ignore, or it'll say remediate or investigate. And then you click that button, and then it'll go into our cloud portal and let us know, which then jumps into our ticketing system, because we track these things in tickets, because that's part of the process of security is documenting these events, and then our technicians remediate it and let you know things are happening, things are handled. This is a security issue. No, this wasn't a security issue. It was a security issue. We corrected it. It's a security issue, and it's going to take something else to correct. So it's a really great system, and it really sets it up powerfully for you guys to be able to be in more control over these things. So you're not having us look at everything. And the system is smart over time. It uses some machine learning and a little bit of artificial intelligence around that, that as things get smarter, by training the system, you'll get less and less alerts. One of the things it looks at is something called access control. So let's say you've got 2 computers in your office that the accounting department uses. We can actually restrict those computers to authorized users. I mean, we can say we can tag those computers. We can say these 2 computers are the accounting computers, and the CFO and the bookkeeper are the only authorized users. We can configure the system to know that. Now, if someone else logs into the accounting computer, like the new salesperson you hired or the new whoever tries to log in, you'll actually get a message. That'll be one of those ones that might come to you and say, was this expected? Was the new salesperson allowed to log into the accounting computers? Might be okay. Maybe that was their new day and you didn't have a computer for them to start and you said it was okay to use. That's fine. But if you didn't know about it, then it's a blind spot. With this, you'll actually know. And we can tag accounting computers, the business owners' computers, the IT computers, computers that have personal health information on it or PCI information. We can tag all of that. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. You can scan them, but these are things we call access control. You want to know, based on policy, what these are, and once you have them set, the system will help enforce those policies. There's other policies we can enforce. Computers, should they be locked down so that no one can go and change those computers? Maybe you've got some computers that aren't authorized to access the internet directly, or you've got critical patches on certain things that are out of date. We want to know about that. The network security side of things. This gets into the real geeky conversation, but there's something called the CVSS. These are known security holes that are given a threat number, and the higher the number, the more important it is to handle those. So if you don't know those are out there, you want to be able to know about that, right? Clear. So this will actually detect that and let us know what's happening. Or maybe you want to restrict who can access the wireless network to certain people. So you can set these policies up because this is where some of the breaches happen, is when people are either intentionally or unintentionally messing with some of these things. And what's great is this runs on a daily basis. You're going to get the alerts, or we're going to get the alerts, depending on what we set, and then those action buttons: remediate, investigate, ignore. It's real simple. Just pick one of those, and we'll handle it. And we have 3 different options on that. There is a free plan, and that's included with our standard managed services contract. That's that basic level of silver, the ongoing basic threat detection. And then, of course, when you call us for something, that's a pay-as-you-go service, unless you have some other plan with us about dealing with those security threats. In the silver plan, these are things that we are including. And for a lot of clients, if they're just doing these basics, it puts you way ahead of the competition. It puts you way ahead of most businesses that are not looking at this. And then at the gold level, we add these next levels of control in. And we walk you through all these. In that initial onboarding of the technology, we help you, we ask you the questions, we make sure you understand what these controls mean, and then we program the system to handle all that. These are at the gold level, and then the platinum adds a little bit more. And you can see why we have the different levels, because some of the security stuff, you want to catch the basics, you want to catch those critical things, and then the more controls you put in, the more possibilities of false positives, the more possibility of things that it might detect if your network's changing quite a bit. Things like that we want to be able to know. And again, if you have compliance needs, if you have HIPAA or PCI, we're also adding GDPR. If you have any audit needs, GDPR is the General Data Protection, I forgot the R. That's the one in Europe that they just created. So if you do a deal with anyone in Europe, you might be subject to GDPR. So this kind of gives you a high level of what's included in the different ones. We'll make the slides available for you. Like I said, this is a new presentation for us. At the end, you're going to get a survey and an opportunity to get the slides, and we would definitely appreciate any feedback you've got. So let's talk about the next steps. So the first thing is that ongoing scanning, looking for those breaches that are on the behind your firewall. Hopefully most of you have a good firewall in place where you're doing the outside scanning. You want to look what's happening on the inside of your network, because that's where either the humans are that work with you that may be intentionally or unintentionally doing something, and that's also where the hackers are trying to get to. They're trying to get to the inside of the network so they can do maximum damage. And then there's that alerts and insight, that process, that consistency of things, and the reporting gives you what you need to be at choice, to say, I'm going to handle this or I'm not going to handle this, and you're clear. We're clear that when this is happening, you're going to have a more secure environment. Your systems overall will be more reliable. If you're subject to compliance, you will avoid those fines and penalties. The awareness that you and your team will have will be dramatically altered. And really, there's so much social engineering going on that awareness is critical. And then overall, your risk is managed. You now know what you know. It's no longer blind spots. You understand where your security issues are. You can choose what there is to deal with. You put the solutions in place. And then in the end, we know you'll have peace of mind and sleep well at night, at least as far as it relates to cybersecurity. If there's something else keeping you up at night, we may or may not be able to help you with that. But for us, that's what it is. We want peace of mind. We know that you guys have businesses to run and you have other things on your plate to handle. And cybersecurity really takes something. It takes investments in technology. It takes an understanding of security. It takes ongoing education. And the more we can wrap that up into a service for you so that you've properly delegated your cybersecurity to someone like Tobin versus abdicating it to I got a guy, or abdicating it like, you know, the pray and hope method, or the abdicate like, well, I bought a firewall, I must be okay. It's a different conversation. So going forward, what you want to look at is, do you need an assessment? Have you had an assessment? If you haven't, we really encourage you to get an assessment. It's very rare that we go in and just isn't finding something somewhat significant. It's truly rare. Pick the one that we need for that. Then we're going to look at that plan together, what we recommend. You'll then decide if there's anything you want to remediate. It might be sometimes it is what we call low-hanging fruit. It might just be a simple checkbox. Oh, check this box and now that one piece that was insecure is now considered secure. Maybe it's that user who is running an administrator. We take them out of the administrator group and we make them a regular user. Simple. Sometimes it's more, and that's straight. Sometimes there is something we see that you're running a piece of equipment that is end of life and is no longer considered secure. It's no longer getting patches and updates. Depending on what that is, that could be something greater. But again, we want you to at least know about it so you can plan for it. And then if you want to do that ongoing managed detection and response, that issue detection, you'd pick one of those. You'd do your free tier or one of the more advanced tiers. So that is it.